Based in Larkspur, California, Stephen A. Nielsen is a U.S. registered patent attorney with many years of experience in patent procurement and in achieving favorable results in federal court in the field of intellectual property litigation. Mr. Nielsen is the past chairperson of the intellectual property section of the Marin County Bar Association. Mr. Nielsen received his JD in 1987 from Bolt Hall, University of California at Berkeley, and also holds a BA in computer science. He may be contacted at steve@nielsenpatents.com, on his website, nielsenpatents.com, or via his LinkedIn page.
I'm Steve Nielsen. I'm a registered patent attorney, and we're going to talk about competency issues relevant to an attorney's ability to perform legal services. What exactly are we going to learn today? We're going to go over the genesis of Rule 1.1 or 3-11, which has many analogous sister statutes in other states. This is based on the California rules, but this lecture is heard throughout the country. And we're going to talk about substance abuse. We call it the new 420 issues for 2019 and 2020. We're going to talk about depression, the drops of water over time. We're going to attempt to tackle those issues, and as well as other categories of impairment, which is mental issues, physical issues, distraction issues. And then we're going to talk about what can we do? Where does the rubber hit the road? How can we take this knowledge into our everyday life and improve our performance? Why are we here today? I'm under no delusions of grandeur. We're here today to keep our license to practice law. Every state has mandatory continuing legal education, and I know you have a choice on which programs you attend, so I'm going to do the best possible job here. But I do understand it's sort of a false economy, sort of a forced economy, or I have a captive audience, is that we all need to listen to someone's program on this subject. We're also here to consider ways to live our life to the fullest and to consider ourselves as a whole. Now, even though I'm from Marin County, I'm not a total touchy-feely person, so we'll give concrete examples on just how this works. We're also going to think about our responsibilities to others in our workplace per California Rule 5.3, and of course the other analogous rules in other states. Sometimes we forget that as attorneys or other types of professionals, our actions trickle down to people around us who might be on our staff. Even if we are solo practitioners, unfortunately, our words and actions can be very powerful to others. So we need to be mindful of our responsibility to others and how our actions can hurt other people without us even knowing about it. And we're also here to consider the bigger picture as now encouraged by the rules of the State Bar of California, Title II, Division II, which we will address in a moment. What is Division II? Rights and responsibilities of members. You have to have at least 4 hours of legal ethics, 1 hour of dealing with the recognition of elimination of bias in the legal profession. In my lecture on that, I call the reduction of bias. I think elimination of bias is a bit difficult, but so I digress. I try to keep my lectures relevant and real. And then we need at least an hour of education addressing substance abuse and or other mental, physical issues that impair members' ability to perform their legal services with competence. That's what we try to focus on today. Our newer rule 1.1 is that a lawyer shall not intentionally, recklessly, with gross negligence, or repeatedly fail to perform legal services with competence. That's a mouthful, and it means a lot of things to a lot of people. I think, in my experience in dealing with lawyers who sort of go astray, it's not necessarily gross negligence, but it's repeatedly failed to perform legal services with competence or fail to perform at all. For example, a lot of attorneys just simply miss deadlines, whether it's from not organizing their time, taking on too much work, not hiring enough helpers. And the other side issue there is the more I learn about employment law, the less likely I am to hire employees, which raises a lot of issues of time management and not taking on cases, which gets us right here to repeatedly fail to perform legal services, which often just means time management, not necessarily intentionally or any real cognitive or physical impairment. For purposes of this rule, reading Part B, competence is any legal service, so I mean the ability to learning and skill, mental, emotional, and physical ability to reasonably necessary to perform the service. So this is relatively new. Mental, emotional, and physical ability. That's sort of sobering, especially emotional. How do we judge our emotions? But I think it's can be quite powerful if one's emotionally a bit off in their ability to finish the job. And then part C and D, read those are pretty old, and you can read those on your own time. But it talks about to have sufficient learning skill or time to learn the skill of it. And the best analogy there is I don't know how many of you have ever watched or judged a high school mock trial program. These high schoolers, they study and they study, they put hours, and they are as good, if not better, than any lawyer you'll see in that courtroom come Monday, even though they have the contests on Saturday. What that teaches me is that if you put the time into it, you can do a great job. So let's not forget that we're not done learning yet. Substance abuse. We've all heard this before. Good lawyer takes to drinking or drugs, hits rock bottom, and his practice goes down. There's a famous spiral. The work your worst, your practice goes down. You drink to sort of self-medicate. The more you drink, the more your practice goes down, and then the more you drink, and it spirals down until you crash and end up getting called by the state bar. Have some very unhappy clients. In the classical story, the lawyer gets help and works happily or just works ever after. And a lot of these lectures are done by attorneys who have been disbarred or reprimanded, and they tell a tall tale. It'd be nice to avoid that, not have your membership record disparaged by either paying your fees late or by having problems. It's quite sobering to think about our state bar out there and the current theory that the state bars in California, they are not your friend. They're attempting to justify their existence, and they will come after us after any client complaint. And the typical lecture is a tidy fairy tale, and as there are obvious states of dysfunction. So it's not always cut and dry. A lot of humanity is different shades of gray. So we're talking about various states of dysfunction. And then we're also interested in how does the story change with the new 420 laws? 420 meaning San Rafael High School in Marin in the 1960s, school would get out at 4:20 in the afternoon, and various people would go and imbibe in marijuana back in the day. So we call these the 420 laws. And then we're also interested in 2019, 2020, DUI and drugged driving issues. How has the law evolved? My understanding is no litmus test or straight cut and dry test to test for all the substances out there. So that's caused some interesting issues with law enforcement. Substance abuse, what can we add for 2020? We're all different. You are different, just like everyone else. That nuance isn't lost on a lot of people. So we're all different, just like everyone else. So in a way, we're all the same in that we're all different. Some can function well for a while. We all know very known high-functioning alcoholics, people who seem to drink every day, and they seem to pull it off for a long period of time. Other people fall apart with a few drinks. So we're all different in our tolerance and ability to function. And some of that may be, not that it matters, the environment of our ancestors, genes selected to survive the brew pub. And that gets us into reproduction of the fittest for that environment. Some people of certain continents never had alcohol into their native culture. So when it comes in, it's a very, very sad thing. And we also have the issue of personality traits, an addictive personality. So what I'm always interested in is there a covariable there? Are people with addictive personality, are they drawn to the law and part of their gene makeup or personality trait is they're also become addicted to alcohol and drugs? Or is there sort of a cause and effect? Do people go into the practice of law and then through the stress of it, they go then become addicted to alcohol and drugs? I don't know if I'll ever know that in my lifetime, but if any of you have any thoughts on that, I always welcome emails. I do get a number of emails on these lectures. And as we progress, you'll see how this has changed since I did this program maybe 4 years ago, with some of the emails that I've received from the years with people with different points of view and people correcting errors that I make. Slide 8. Substance abuse. How does it start? Many people who I talk with who are in the rehabilitation industry, they have a theory that it's simply fun to drink. It's simply fun to alter our mood. It's simply fun to get out of our head, whether it's with alcohol or drugs. And it's not necessarily an addictive personality. It's not necessarily due to stress, but there's just a temporary joy to it. I've heard that enough anecdotally. I think that is a factor, or appears to be. The other issue is that alcohol and now marijuana is all around us. Out of sight, out of mind. I know from trying to monitor our diet. If we have junk food in the house, it's hard to say no to that come 10 o'clock. And you want to see one more show. If there's a chocolate bar there, it's hard not to eat it. And the same with alcohol and drugs. If it's in our house, if it's around us, that can be how the substance abuse starts. It can be simple as just not bringing it home, not having it around you, not going with that sort of crowd that has that available, because sometimes that becomes normalized. And a good story there is with vaping. For 2019, 2020, we now know that vaping is exceptionally damaging. And we have a whole generation of teenagers who started a few years ago with the kid-flavored vape pens. And it seemed fairly innocent. And now we know how heinous it is. We have a whole generation of kids hooked on that. And that's sort of an unknowing danger that we didn't know about a few years ago. So that's how substance abuse starts too, such as the GIs in World War II being given cigarettes and their C-rats. And then later we find out it's a terrible thing to smoke cigarettes. But I think for 2020, the substance abuse has sort of started unknowingly, at least in the vape pen world, with flavored tobaccos. Prevention. How do we do this? Do we set limits? Do we have a friend monitor our work and our lives? And to encourage us to enjoy the feeling of being on top of our work. So we're going to talk about having sort of a buddy to help you know when maybe you need to retire, know when you need a problem. Better to hear it from a buddy than the state bar. In detection, substance abuse, we talked about having a couple of good friends to tell you the painful truth when it arises. I think back in the day, people would go to the gym, they'd have workout buddies. Nowadays, we're more siloed. We wear our headsets and we don't socialize so much, but we can be social with our work. Even if you're a solo practitioner, you can have other friends who are in the field who can check in with, have a lunch every 2 weeks to talk about things, visit each other's office, just kind of get a feel for what's going on with someone's inbox in their email. And you need to be such a friend to have such a friend. And few of us are going to stop substance abuse on our own. We definitely need a mentor or a buddy to sort of point the problem out so that we can get the help that we need. Then we come into the issue of, would one use reasonable force to stop a drunk driver or drugged driver in a buddy system? You can get a little assertive to say to your buddy, hey, you've got a problem, get some help. On the other hand, it's difficult to do a blood test for drug driving, which is an issue that law enforcement is now facing. Drug driving becomes more prevalent with our marijuana laws. So it becomes difficult to monitor ourselves or others with any particular physical test. What sort of treatment we have for substance abuse? This is almost as controversial as weight loss, and it's very difficult. Where are the classical double-blind studies? They don't seem to be there so much. They're hard to find. We still seem to be in the dark ages of treating substance abuse. We don't have a flu shot type cure or treatment. And then, so the question is, who knows what works for you? Recently, I've learned that the AA program, which is used, mandated a lot of court systems, is not always God-based. And my prior version is 4 years ago. I said it was God-based, and someone wrote me and said, no, it's not always. It doesn't have to be faith-based. And so that's a good piece of information. And there's another program called Rational Recovery, which is pretty much an atheist program. There is no God. You must pull yourself up. It doesn't matter which program you go to, as long as you go to one and you stick with it. Studies have shown that it is helpful to join a program if you have some sort of problem, whether it's drugs or alcohol or other things that we might become addicted to. Mental impairment, mental illness, sort of a taboo subject. In 2008, the state bar considered adding mental illness as an alternative topic. It wasn't until 2014 that the mental aspect was added to our state bar rubric. And the stigma of mental impairment is well addressed by the current work of 2019 of Kelly Greenwood of Mindshare Partners. She runs an excellent site and program where their stated goal is, and truly is, effective in eliminating the stigma of mental health in the workplace. Every law firm should look into this. Studies have shown that when lawyers look at mental health as objectively as physical health, people get the treatment they need. They can be honest about taking an afternoon off to get the help they want to do or to go to some program. The stigma goes away. People can be more honest and get the help they need, and the organization thrives. Mindshare Partners, there's an average person waits 8 to 10 years to get help for mental health condition. That's nearly a decade of symptoms unaddressed and untreated before someone decides to seek support. Be preposterous for many of us to consider not getting help if we had a cold over a month, let alone a decade. But for mental health, it's the norm. So I think in the next 10 years, we're going to see an openness of mental health issues in the workplace. People will get the treatment as if they've broken an arm. And I would encourage all of you to Google Mindshare Partners and see the work that they're doing. And they do talk about it takes more than access to solve mental health issues. It takes social acceptance, using a strong stigma with the conditions and symptoms. And 8 out of 10 employees won't seek treatment for mental health because of fear of shame, regardless of the treatment options. Depression, is it the kingpin of impairment? Depression may keep people drinking and or using illicit substances. And are we still in the dark ages regarding of depression? We've just started to take PET scans to see brain activity and the effects of proposed treatment. There's still no scientific consensus, lots of junk science out there. Depression, effect on other issues. Look at the Robin Williams story, sort of a slow decline, the cause and effect of pessimism versus optimism. If we're optimistic, does it help? Can we act happy? You might become happy. We're all familiar with the phrase, fake it until you make it. Depression can make it difficult to control stress levels. Stress is a subject worthy of a separate lecture. Overall, for stress and depression, there's a common wisdom here of setting boundaries and not getting overwhelmed. There's ample room for scientific improvement. What are the current modalities of prevention, detection, and treatment of mental issues, emotional issues? There are certainly things that are not harmful that certainly may help, such as acting positive, being grateful. Harvard studies are showing that moments of gratitude, mindfulness, and meditation are objectively helpful through some PET scans and other objective studies. A question to figure out if you might benefit from such modalities might be, have you stopped enjoying things? It's a simple question, but it's quite effective. And the antidepressant commercials do a great job of this. They show people they just aren't they aren't smiling, they aren't having fun. When you meet such people out in the world, you can see it pretty quickly. It's not your job necessarily to point things out and try to change them. But the better question is, can you look into yourself and see, when you wake up, are you just not excited every day? Then maybe you want to think about doing some things that can be small or larger. Treatment, good luck on that. It's not always effective, but to stay positive. For 2019-20, there's some great work by Rick Hansen, who wrote Hardwiring Happiness, which is an excellent book. He's written some other books as well, but if you Google Rick Hansen, you'll see some great writings by him and meditations and other things that have been shown to be very effective. And he's been well reviewed in Harvard studies, providing some sort of self-help things that one can do. One can set up their own meditation group, although I imagine most of us are going to be too busy to actually do that. But there are books one can read and things one can do to sort of slow down and try to enjoy things more, which deals very well with depression, sort of the silent modality that really hurts a lot of people, makes life difficult, and zaps one of energy and really can affect one's ability to do a great job at work. Mental issues. Let's talk about cognitive ability. Let's assume mental fitness at the start of the legal career. I think it's a fair assumption because to get into law school, it's nowhere nearly as difficult than as compared to medical school, but it still takes a bit of effort to get into law school. You got to have some decent grades and take the LSAT and become a lawyer. You got to pass the law school exams, pass a bar exam, interview for a job or start your own business. I think we can argue that in the beginning, we're all pretty mentally fit, not necessarily emotionally fit, but pretty mentally fit. I'll leave that as an open question beyond the scope of this lecture. But now we're going to talk about what occurs over time, what mental changes occur over the course of a career. Age, the great thief. No one argues when I make this point about age being just a thief in a lot of different ways. And we talk about the normal, quote, aging process leads to cognitive decline. Some people do well, some people don't. Recently, I was talking to a veteran who talked about visiting friends at the VA hospital. Now, one can see that abuse over the years, whether it's drugs, alcohol, stress, untreated post-traumatic stress, really has an effect. And these older men and women, mostly men, are in the VA, and they are beaten up from a lifetime of poor habits. And that's something for us to think about. And most of us are probably familiar with the joke, had I known I was going to live so long, I would have taken better care of myself. So if you ever visit a VA hospital, you'll see that. If you talk to people there, they'll tell you about their years of smoking cigarettes and drinking and stress, overweight, sitting down, not moving, and it takes a toll. So we need a backstop to protect the public. And as we mentioned before, it's good to have a colleague or two to watch you. And I think this is even needed in large law firms because a lot of you or us have worked or do work in a large law firm. You may get a feeling of support during the firm Christmas party. But often in a big firm, you're on your own. You have some internal clients, external clients, maybe a couple of committees, a secretary, but you're on your own. So you can buddy up with a person in a big firm to sort of look out for each other. Or if you're worried about disclosure of private matters, maybe someone outside your firm to confer with to see how you're doing, sort of the coaching paradigm. We can't rely on the marketplace. The legal profession is not like the butcher's shop written about in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, where there's good information. The public knows what's going on. There's a competitive market. These things don't happen in the legal field because our poor clients, they often don't know if they're getting a good deal or not, whether the lawyer's doing a good job until often it's too late. For example, it may take 4 years to figure out if your patent lawyer is doing a good job because it can take 4 years to get a patent. So the marketplace, unfortunately, doesn't really work like it does in Wealth of Nations to sort of weed out or warn lawyers that they are declining. Dementia happens. It's a catch-all term from various stages in the brain that occur over time. Such changes can affect your behavior, memory, and judgment. Medical profession estimates that 10% of people over age 65 have some form of dementia, and up to 50% over age 85 experience dementia. It's a difficult fact of life. And it's an interesting sliding scale of cognitive ability or dementia that often comes up in trust and probate matters, where there's different scales of mental competence for one signing a will being somewhat high, but a very low threshold for one's ability to get married. So in other areas of law, this area of dementia is well studied. And if you want to go further in it, I'd suggest you go to a local section meeting on trusts and estates where they talk about sort of the sliding scale of dementia, different mental thresholds for different legal actions. It exceeds the scope here, but I found the lecture fascinating. I encourage all of you to learn about this and see how it's measured and just what you need for certain legal activities. But for the practice of law, I would hope this to be the highest standard. And we want to think about being very on top of things to continue subjecting our services to the public. When dementia happens, it seems prudent to get ready to close down your practice. Our state bar, I'm sure other state bars have guidelines for closing or selling the practice. And here again, it's nice to have a strong social network. Even if you're a solo practitioner, I'd encourage you to join your local bar association, go to the holiday parties, go to some of the meetings and be connected with other lawyers and be thinking about who do you sell your practice to? How do you close it down? If and when that comes. Some lawyers have to shut it down at age 50. The lawyers I know are in their mid 80s and still growing strong. So we just don't know, but it's good to think ahead. Where are you going to go when that time comes? Because you don't want to do it ungracefully. Of course, there's treatment for that. And talk therapy is excellent for dementia and other things you may have. It may not cure it, but it'll help you get through it with your emotional stability intact. To avoid sort of the natural cognitive decline, there are tried and true methods. One is to engage in new mental challenges. That's one of the upsides of being a lawyer. We are paid to think and solve problems, which helps keep our neuroplasticity and long-term and short-term memory intact. So arguably, going to work helps our brains, but a problem or a reward for our years of service and diligence is that after a while we can do I won't say our work with one hand behind our back, but we're not always having to think as hard as we did in the beginning. And thus, to avoid the natural cognitive decline, a new mental challenge might be something called a magnificent obsession. If you Google, you'll find a lot of learning on this, and it include playing bridge, solving crossword puzzles, or enjoying hobbies such as learning to or relearning to play the guitar, doing something a little different outside of your comfort zone, avoiding watching TV at night, because sitting's the new smoking. I know you've heard me say that in all my lectures, but it truly is. And if you can just get away from that TV set or your laptop watching Prime Video or Netflix, and get a hobby where you're doing something, moving around, truly slow down this natural cognitive decline, and hopefully make you a bit happier to get away from the large or the small screen. Avoid negative mental conditioning. We evolved to be hunters and gatherers. That's most people seem to agree on that. What's interesting, if you study the controversies over diet, such as the paleo, the keto diet, the low carb diet, the old vegetarian diet, the latest craze is this program called Game Changers. You can find there's still a lot of learning on it, and half the fun is just reading the new studies and seeing the double-blind studies on diet. And the relevance there is people try to mimic how we evolve. So the current thinking is we evolved to be hunters and gatherers. Who knows if that's true or not? I think in the next few years, there'll be more varied opinions on this. But I think a lot of us can agree that 10,000 years ago and before, most of life activity was slow in pace, which allowed for thoughtful reflection. You're a hunter-gatherer. At nighttime, you didn't have LED lights. You probably just go to sleep. But there'd be time to sort of think and ponder. And we certainly weren't bombarded with electronic stimuli. To imagine being out in nature, while there may be moments of sheer terror, dealing with predators, there was time for a slower pace and more thought and reflection. And of course, now we have these being texted and bombarded continuously if we allow it, which I think encourages or leads to sort of a negative mental conditioning. And also in support of that, think about things that were done in the past by people, such as consider the hours of careful thought and study to develop Newton's laws of physics, something that we still holds true today. That takes a good high school kid or a college kid a lot of hours just to figure out Newton's laws of physics, and of course the calculus that he derived. But he invented it a couple hundred years ago without TV. Maybe he had a slide rule calculator, but there was a lot of careful thought and study there, which we arguably don't have today, or it's easy to lose that. So we want to get back to hours of careful thought and reflection by turning off a lot of the electronic stimuli, and we'll get to that. Just think about Newton had very few physical instruments, and you can go back to that pace. I think a lot of us will have much better mental and emotional health. This twitch and click society will literally change our neural receptors and our neural pathways. This has been done through PET scans and other brain scans. That studies show that video gamers undergo noticeable changes in brain structure. There's also some more recent studies that show that children's brains change as can those who are immersed in the small screen, whether it's a little video game the parents give them, because it's easier to put a kid in front of a video game than to hear them cry and to physically interact with them. It's a sad fact of life, but as a parent, I remember this quite well. And it was certainly tempting to give them in front of a TV or give them a video game. But the studies now show that kids' brains change, but the studies are too recent to know is that a positive or negative change. But the brain functions are changing with kids by virtue of the video game or video toy exposure. And it would seem that that's not a good thing. I just can't think of click and twitch mentality, helping a kid. How we're going to have the next Isaac Newton, someone who can sit and just ponder and truly study and focus. We can still have that today, but it's going to take a lot more effort to get to that place of focus and study. Since the advent of the fax machine, maybe even earlier, the practice of law has sped up. I remember when fax machines were fairly new, things seemed to go faster. Before that, you'd send a letter in the mail and it would get there, you'd have phone calls. But with fax machines, things get there. And now, of course, with email and interesting how so many clients text to their lawyers, things speed up. People expect immediate responses. Unless we're careful, we face a constant barrage of electronic messages or electronic interruptions. And the buzzwords of 2019, 2020 is interruption management, and cell phone itis, which means we're just getting bombarded. And there's a good theory of us not letting the constant email or constant email gratification change your brain. And the best analogy is slot machines and casinos work on the same theory of random reward. I don't know how addictive slot machines are. And we're sort of drawn to that because it's sort of, in a way, more fun. We get this little drop of dopamine. We're checking our text, checking our email to see what's the new stimuli. So it takes a lot of discipline to not get cell phone itis. The constant interruptions are a mental impairment, both in the short term and the long term. Studies show that constant email interruptions can result in a drunk driver type of mistakes and productivity. It's sort of a fallacy that we can multitask. We only do one thing at a time. The more complex our work is, the longer it takes to load our frontal cortex with the working memory that we need to have. That's why in my practice, I have 5 computer screens where I keep all my documents there. I can kind of look at them, and it sort of speeds up loading up the working memory with the information needed. But even with a lot of computer screens that hold your information up there, when you get interrupted, you lose it, and it takes time to get there. And the longer it takes to load your front memory, your working memory, then we're prone to procrastination. It's easier to go back to look to your texting, your email, and productivity suffers. So even a 2-second interruption can cause people to lose their train of thought. Stopping interruptions to decrease mistakes. There was a great article in 2013 that one of the greatest declines are office interruptions. And I know people like to vilify Kaiser, but Kaiser goes to great lengths to allow nurses to be undisturbed as they prepare medications for patients. This is one of my favorite slides in all my videos. We have sort of an old world Kaiser focus. And this gal, she's entering in patient prescriptions, and she has this yellow tag which says, "Hey, I'm entering patient prescriptions. Don't interrupt me. Don't come by to talk about the ball game, etc." And I think this is a great visual to say, okay, so what in your life are you going to honor that's so important that you're not going to be interrupted? So isn't your practice of law, isn't your life so worthwhile that you're not going to want others to distract you? And I really like this yellow badge. So in my youth, an exercise was to build a model airplane out of balsa wood without distraction, TV or computers. Of course, TV only had 3 channels back then, so it wasn't difficult. There's sort of a calmness. And then in high school, to fill a lab notebook with observations of seeing a candle burning. First one thinks you're going to have 2 sentences, but if you really slow down and watch that candle burn in half an hour, you can fill up a good part of a notebook. Just getting yourself to slow down and focus. Very difficult in our current lives since we have our cell phones with us, and clients and our kids expect immediate responses with each text. So that's an important problem to think about. And I encourage all of us to make some effort to have hours or moments with no interruptions. So you want to ask yourself, are you as focused as a Kaiser worker? And I like this slide because here's a young associate at a law firm just being inundated with messages, and texts, and post-its. He's got the caffeine there thrown up. He's got the sugar pie there. He's trying to eat with the sugar rush. It's just a mess. It's amazing anything can get done in that environment. Our mind does not want to go back to work after an interruption. After an unscheduled interruption, we tend to move to quick, easy tasks such as checking Google News, texts, or other email. We pay a steep price in time and effort to reload our working memory with a demanding project, such as a motion for summary judgment. I could say writing a patent, but very few of you are patent lawyers out there, but a motion for summary judgment or a motion for judgment on the pleadings, a motion to dismiss. Something that takes, it's more than 10 pages and takes a study of case law and statutes and then facts, pleadings. You're going to have a lot in your working memory to put that together. And it's just darn hard to do that when you've had an unscheduled interruption and you get that dopamine going because you're looking for the next quick fix to look at something quick, such as a text or an email. What was focused in the old world? Talked about the candle in the chemistry class and building model airplanes from balsa wood. Maybe today we can translate that into what we talked about before, the magnificent obsession of crossword puzzles, playing bridge, playing an instrument, learning a foreign language, maybe taking a class at night, local community college, just getting out, or dancing classes are really good for that hand-eye coordination movement to avoid sitting all the time. Consider interruption management. This is easier said than done. Consider scheduling your viewing of email. Could you really, we just say at the top of every hour, you look at your email? Is it possible to do that? Who knows? Each of us, it's difficult because you may have new clients coming in or important clients wanting a quick answer. And can they learn to wait for an hour for that? That's a difficult question that all of us have to figure out on our own. What I do is I schedule phone calls or client meetings in the afternoons since I'm a morning person. And so my freshest energy is in the morning. I try to get in before the emails and phone calls hit for that uninterrupted time. And then to the extent that I can, to turn off that email browser and work on things and then look at the email later. And I find that people can wait an hour for a response on the emails or the text. And it does help me get through the tougher work in the day. And also, I encourage people to enjoy the potential efficiency of technology and to stay current in it, because part of the standard of care is to keep abreast of technology. For example, if you didn't have email nowadays, it'd be pretty hard to stay on top of things. In fact, if you didn't have a computer and a browser, you couldn't file documents in federal court. So we have to stay current on this. I don't know how cutting edge we need to be. I don't do cryptocurrency or anything too fancy like that, but within reason to stay current on technology. And I mean, we don't want to go back to the card catalogs of the library. Many of us remember that. I tell my kids how easy they have it. They can Google any term and get the answer. And back in our day, you go to the library, find the catalog cards, find a book, go get the book, open the book, and sure enough, it would not have the information you need, and you'd repeat. That was terribly inefficient. So there are some great joys of modern technology. So how do we summarize our prevention, detection, and treatment of substance abuse, mental impairment, physical impairment? That's an issue we can talk about in a bit here. But in general, we want to keep an active mind, enjoying hobbies, and having outside interests besides pushing the mouse in the office. It's good to have a couple of friends quiz you, check in with your practice, and especially check your compliance with your deadlines. would suggest carving out time for major projects. A lawyer I worked with back in the day would just go in the conference room where there would not be interruptions and just work on a project in the conference room, getting away from his desk and his computer. And that was very effective. And he did very well doing that. So I would encourage all of us, if you have a conference room to go into, to go there if you don't quite have the discipline to turn off your email browser. And then treatment, refocus efforts on puzzles and other mental challenges. Physical issues that impair. It's the slow burn that damages our bodies. Most of us work in an office. We're sitting too much, not standing. And what's interesting is we would appear to be dead to our ancestors since they had to keep moving to hunt or gather, just find some food, interact, keep moving. I'd imagine there was not a lot of sitting there. And scholars agree that we would look dead to our ancestors. Our constant sitting is just very unhealthy for us. We evolved to walk and move as hunter and gatherers. And it's just been over the last 10,000 years that we've been busy as farmers. In just the last 50 to 200 years, that office work has arisen. So our bodies have had no time to adapt. It takes many generations. And I don't think we're going to get any natural selection where people who aren't fit for office work don't reproduce. We're just not going to get there because we have such great medical care that we can be in pretty bad shape and pass on our genes. So it's really up to us to take effort to physically and make efforts to adapt to this office work environment that's become major over the last 50 to 200 years, a very recent phenomenon. And I'm grateful for office work because it provides a good living without us hurting ourselves. And there's a lot of advantages to it. And also, in our modern society, what choice do we have? It's very difficult to buy an acre of land in Oregon or Washington State and live off the grid and build your hut with the solar. It's just no man's island. It's very difficult to do. So most of us are going to be working in offices, and we need to keep moving and not sit all day. These are the physical issues that hit us. And then the other issues are, of course, what do we eat? And that exceeds the scope of this lecture. And in brief summary, who knows? There's just latest science says that all these diets, they tend to work the same. It's compliance. But it's interesting in that the California bar talks about physical issues that impair, and I think other states are involving the same language. And there's always a stigma of sort of saying, well, can you do it physically? Because the idea of being a lawyer is that you don't have to be in physically great shape. You don't have to be a natural athlete to be an amazing lawyer. But yet physical impairment is recognized as something that's addressed by our state bar. So we got to think about it. So to me, it means trying to keep your arteries clean and getting some movement and just having the ability to stay awake all day and do your job. This is my favorite phrase, and those who know me and my work are sick of me saying this, but I love to say it. Sitting is the new smoking. It is so true. Our bodies just don't work if we stay still. At work, when you're sitting, your best position is your next position. Sitting, of course, your better position is walking around or standing up. A standing desk is a great way to work, but what I find is I have a standing desk, but do I have the discipline to actually use it, or is it just easier to stay seated all day? So it's good to have a standing desk and to use it, or a standing desk that can be stationary, not necessarily one that goes up and down and just sit in sort of a stool up there. So you're sitting or standing and not going up and down with the desk. I think that's a good way to go because the desks that go up and down, they're quite common, relatively inexpensive, but people are tending to not use them and actually stand up. And as I talked about before, multiple computer monitors keep your memory, working memory fed, and keep your head on a swivel because you're having to look around from monitor to monitor. And that's some movement to avoid getting a stiff neck. And then also ergonomics are very important. very easy to get carpal tunnel, to get pains in our forearms from just pushing the mouse. A lot of you younger lawyers may think, oh, that'll never happen to me. But you talk to an older lawyer or talk to some of your more aged support staff, and they will go on and on about their painful wrists and forearms. Improved eating and activity does not need to be extreme. Studies have shown that simply walking is an excellent, sustainable exercise. It's also good for your brain to get out and walk outside and not be on the elliptical machine or the treadmill, because your brain doesn't adapt to the very terrain. You get this repetitive stress in your legs and knees by going to the gym and getting on the same elliptical or treadmill. So walking outside where you got to walk up a sidewalk or just step or avoid a rock, or hiking out in the woods, if you can do that, it's not realistic for many people. What's really interesting in this walking exercise is this advent or popularity of what the Japanese culture does, which is green foresting or forest bathing. They'll take a bus out to the forest and walk out in the forest and breathe in the forest air and enjoy nature. And a lot of places in Japan, it takes an effort to get out to nature. But a lot of us in California, I think the rest of the country, has some access to some trees to get outside, to go for a walk outside on a trail that isn't all flat, to sort of take things in. And studies have shown that this is very healthy for our physical and mental well-being. And I don't mean to be a left-wing, touchy-feely person, but there is legitimate science to show that green foresting or foresting, walking out in nature is good for your mind and body. I encourage everyone to do that. And then with the physical issues, eating more salads with little dressing is not a difficult goal to achieve. There are just simple little things that work. And then I'm always fascinated with current diet, eating lifestyle. Let's call them that, not diets. There's keto, there's low fat, there's low carbs, there's vegetarianism. Who knows what works? Some people say none of it works because most people can't comply with many people can't comply with a healthy program. There's so much junk food around us, so many unhealthy diets. And as my physician told me just the other day, he said, Steve, it's possible to be vegetarian and to eat a very unhealthy vegetarian diet. For example, if you just ate French fries all the time, that would not be a healthy alternative. So we're not going to solve any diet controversies here. In fact, it looks like 2019, 2020, there's no scientific consensus as to quote, the right way to eat. I would just suggest we just try to eat a little bit better and eat a bit less and keep moving and go out for walks if you can. That seems to be the best way to deal with the physical impairment issues. It's not that sexy, not that exciting. It seems to be the way that works for most. But I think there's no harm in trying one of these health plans. If you can keep up with it, it's not too painful. You can comply and not go to bed hungry. So if that happens, you're going to go back and eat the unhealthy food. Delegation of work is also a very important factor for keeping our mental and physical health. And the question that arises is, can an attorney be truly a solo practitioner in 2019, 2020? My father was an attorney back in the 70s, and he had to have a secretary because he didn't know how to type. And there was a lot of typing of documents. And to do a letter required a lot of time. Today we have email, but can do our own letters. But still, can we be on our own? Do we need a helper? Do we need an assistant? Can we outsource maybe our calendaring or something? What can we delegate? And maybe there's work we shouldn't take if we consider ourselves full. It's very difficult to turn away work. But if we do have helpers, whether it's sort of offshore, inter-office, or remote, we still have a duty to supervise. In Rule 5 of California, I'm sure every state has the same rule. duty to supervise. It's sort of a non-delegable duty for us to supervise the work of those who are below us or who help us out. We have to read it and look at it and not just think it's going to be perfect because we're responsible at the end of the day. And there may be times to say no to new work as we progress and gain confidence. If we get sort of a difficult feeling about a client or a lack of enthusiasm or just something doesn't feel right, odds are that's work we should pass on. But that's tough. A lot of us just enjoy the work, and it's hard to say no to new work. But limiting our practice to a certain amount of work will certainly go a long ways to keeping us fit mentally and physically and emotionally. What resources do we have to help us comply with our duty to stay physically, mentally, and emotionally competent to perform services for the public? There's a lot of senior lawyers' resources that we can find at our local state bar website. Mindshare Partners Institute, run by Kelly Green, who I mentioned before, and there's her website there. Mindsharepartners.org has a wealth of information of what we can do in the workplace for ourselves, for our own self-care, but also the culture of our organization. And the theory here is that the more an organization does to foster or to reduce the stigma of mental health, we're never going to eliminate, just like I don't think we're ever going to eliminate bias. If we can reduce the stigma of people getting help for their mental health issues, people are going to do better and perform better. I would implore the law firms to do the same as well. So here's some good resources of Mindshare Partners. Here's some other websites. Talks about mental health at work. People by Thrive Global. It's a great resource to look at. And of course, our California bar has a senior lawyers area, and there's the link for that as well. And we have a hotline with our state bar as well. And other resources are I think the books by Rick Hansen that I mentioned earlier are excellent. And if you sort of Google around, you might find a mindfulness group, or you can go to a guided meditation. I'd suggest go to the first one that's maybe a half hour or so. The first one I went to, the meditation was about 40 minutes, and then the meditator, the guide, in fact, it was Rick Hansen. He's here local in Marin. He said, okay, we're going to take a break and then come back and do this again. And I was spent. I thought, well, the first 40-minute meditation was a break. And I didn't need to take a break and go back and sit for 40 minutes. So the big picture is you don't want to push yourself to have to sort of meditate for more than 10 minutes at a time. It's an acquired taste. But studies have shown that it's worthwhile to engage in mindfulness, and also the buzzword now is self-care. And there's a lot of things we can do to be as nice to ourselves as we would to someone else. And that's an important new concept for 2019 and 2020. So in great summary here, we want to get moving. Stand up right now if you're watching this lecture. Hopefully you've watched this lecture, listened to it standing up or doing something other than just sitting in your cortisol juices, getting stressed. So I welcome your questions and comments, as I mentioned before. This lecture evolves over the years, people adding their 2 cents, and with the new learning for 2021, I'm sure there'll be something more scientific, new studies that go on. I welcome your comments. I want to encourage everyone to, when they turn this lecture off, just get up and walk around. If you have any questions or concerns, my contact information is there, and I look forward to hearing from any one of you. Thank you much. Take care.